The soft glow of the morning sun filtered through the towering windows of a sleek modern mansion nestled in the heart of Silicon Valley. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, its cold, minimalist design reflecting the emptiness that had taken over Michael Anderson's life. Michael, a successful CEO of a thriving software company, had built his empire from the ground up. To the outside world, he was the epitome of success, wealthy, powerful, and respected. But behind the closed doors of his sprawling estate, he was a man consumed by grief and helplessness. 2 years ago, a devastating car accident had shattered his world. His wife, Laura, had been taken from him in an instant, leaving him to raise their 8-year-old son, Oliver, alone. But the accident hadn't just claimed Laura's life, it had also stolen Oliver's voice. The once lively and curious boy had retreated into silence, refusing to speak or engage with the world around him. Doctors called it selective mutism, a psychological response to the trauma he had endured. For Michael, it felt like losing his son twice. The mansion, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like a hollow shell. Michael buried himself in work, using his company as a distraction from the pain he couldn't face. But no amount of success could fill the void left by his family. Oliver spent his days in his room, surrounded by books and toys he no longer touched. The boy's silence was a constant reminder of Michael's failure to protect the people he loved most. One evening, as Michael sat alone in his office, staring blankly at a photo of his family, his closest friend and business partner David walked in. "Michael, you can't keep going like this," David said, his tone firm but compassionate. "Oliver needs help, and so do you." Michael sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I've tried everything, David. Therapists, specialists, you name it. Nothing works." David hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's someone I know. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. She's a music therapist. I've heard she's worked wonders with kids like Oliver." "Music therapist," Michael repeated, skepticism evident in his voice. "How is that supposed to help?" "Just meet her," David urged. "What do you have to lose?" Reluctantly, Michael agreed. A week later, a black sedan pulled up to the gates of the Anderson estate. Sarah Mitchell stepped out, her expression a mix of determination and nervousness. Beside her was her 6-year-old daughter Emma, a bright-eyed girl clutching a small keyboard under one arm. As they approached the front door, Sarah took a deep breath, silently vowing to do everything in her power to help the broken family waiting inside. The heavy oak doors of the Anderson mansion creaked open, revealing Michael standing in the grand entryway. He was dressed in a crisp suit, his posture as rigid as the cold marble floors beneath him. His sharp features betrayed no emotion, but his tired eyes gave away the weight he carried. He extended a hand toward Sarah, his voice low and formal. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for coming," he said, his tone polite but distant. His gaze briefly flickered to Emma, who was peeking curiously around her mother's legs. "And this must be your daughter?" Sarah shook his hand firmly, offering a warm smile. "Yes, this is Emma. I hope it's all right that she's here. She's a big part of my work." Michael nodded stiffly, stepping aside to let them in. "Of course. Follow me." As they entered, Emma's wide eyes darted around the mansion, taking in the high ceilings, the gleaming chandeliers, and the sleek, modern furniture. "Mom, this place looks like a museum," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Sarah gently placed a hand on her shoulder, silently reminding her to behave. Michael led them through the house, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. "Oliver spends most of his time in his room," he explained as they walked. "He doesn't talk, he doesn't play, he barely even eats with me anymore. I've tried everything, but nothing seems to reach him." Sarah listened intently, her heart aching for the boys she had yet to meet. "Trauma can be a difficult wall to break through," she said gently, "but music has a way of reaching places words can't. I'll do my best to help him." Michael glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I hope you're right." They stopped in front of a closed door on the second floor. Michael hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. "He might not respond to you right away," he warned. Don't take it personally. Sarah nodded, her resolve unwavering. I understand. Michael opened the door, revealing a dimly lit room. The curtains were drawn tightly, blocking out the sunlight. In the corner of the room, a small figure sat curled up on a beanbag chair, his back to the door. Oliver's dark hair was messy, and his shoulders were hunched as if he were trying to make himself invisible. Oliver, Michael said softly, stepping into the room. This is Ms. Mitchell. She's here to help you. The boy didn't move. He didn't even look up. Michael sighed, his shoulders sagging in defeat. I'll leave you to it, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. He turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. Sarah stood still for a moment, taking in the room. It was filled with books, toys, and art supplies, all untouched and gathering dust. She set her bag down on the floor and knelt to Emma's level. Why don't you wait outside for a bit, sweetheart? She whispered. I need to talk to Oliver, alone. Emma nodded, her usual energy subdued by the somber atmosphere. She slipped out of the room, leaving Sarah alone with the silent boy. Sarah approached slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She didn't speak right away, not wanting to overwhelm him. Instead, she sat down on the floor a few feet away, giving him space. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small ukulele, its polished wood gleaming softly in the dim light. She began to strum a gentle melody, the soft notes filling the room like a warm breeze. It wasn't a song with words, just a simple, soothing tune. As she played, she kept her eyes on Oliver, watching for any sign of a reaction. At first, there was nothing. He remained still, his face buried in his knees. But then, ever so slightly, his head tilted toward the sound. Sarah's fingers moved deftly over the strings, her heart lifting at the small but significant response. Hi, Oliver, she said softly, her voice as gentle as the music. I'm Sarah. I'm not here to make you talk or do anything you don't want to do. I just thought you might like some music. Oliver didn't reply, but his body seemed to relax just a little. Encouraged, Sarah continued to play, letting the music do the talking. After a few minutes, she set the ukulele down and reached into her bag again, pulling out a small tambourine. She placed it on the floor between them, close enough for him to reach if he wanted to. This is for you, she said. You don't have to use it, but it's here if you feel like making some noise. For a long moment, Oliver didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched the tambourine with the tips of his fingers. The soft jingle of the metal discs broke the silence, and Sarah smiled. That's a good start, she said warmly. We'll take it one step at a time. Meanwhile, outside the room, Emma had wandered back downstairs, where Michael was pacing in the living room. She approached him with her small keyboard in hand. Mr. Anderson, she said brightly, do you have a piano here? Michael stopped pacing, startled by her sudden question. Yes, we do. It's in the music room. Can I see it? Emma asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Michael hesitated, then nodded. Sure, follow me. As he led her to the music room, he couldn't help but notice how different Emma was from Oliver. She was so full of life, so unafraid to speak her mind. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Sarah and Emma could bring some of that light into his son's life. The next morning, Sarah arrived in the music room, a bright and airy space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling garden. A grand piano stood in the center of the room, its polished surface gleaming in the sunlight. Michael had reluctantly agreed to let Sarah use the space for her sessions with Oliver, though he remained skeptical about her methods. Oliver shuffled into the room behind his father, his head down and his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie. He didn't look at Sarah or the piano. He didn't look at anything. Michael gave Sarah a hesitant glance before stepping back. I'll be in my office if you need me, he said, his voice low. Then he turned and left, leaving Sarah and Oliver alone. Sarah smiled warmly at the boy, though he didn't meet her gaze. Good morning, Oliver, she said gently. I thought we could try something new today. She walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench, patting the space beside her. "Come sit with me," she invited. Oliver hesitated, his small frame stiff with resistance. But after a moment, he shuffled over and perched on the edge of the bench, as far from her as he could manage. "That's a good start," Sarah said, her tone encouraging. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play a simple, cheerful tune. The melody was light and playful, like a conversation without words. As the notes filled the room, Sarah glanced at Oliver out of the corner of her eye. He was still staring at the floor, but his shoulders seemed a little less tense. After a few minutes, Sarah stopped playing and turned to him. "Do you want to try?" she asked, her voice soft. She placed her hands in her lap, leaving the keys open for him. Oliver didn't respond. He didn't even look at the piano. But Sarah wasn't discouraged. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small xylophone, its colorful bars glinting in the sunlight. She placed it on the bench between them, along with a pair of mallets. "This is yours," she said. "You can play anything you want. There's no right or wrong way." For a long moment, Oliver didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and picked up one of the mallets. He tapped the xylophone once, producing a soft, chiming note. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with hope. "That's it," she said. "You're doing great." Oliver tapped the xylophone again, this time a little harder. The sound was louder, more confident. Sarah didn't say anything more. She just let him explore, her presence calm and non-intrusive. After a few minutes, Oliver set the mallet down and folded his hands in his lap. But for the first time, he looked up at Sarah, his dark eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment. It was a small victory, but to Sarah it felt monumental. Over the next few days, Sarah continued her sessions with Oliver, each one building on the last. She introduced him to different instruments, a tambourine, a small drum, a recorder, letting him choose what he wanted to play. Sometimes he would participate, and sometimes he wouldn't, but Sarah never pushed him. She let him set the pace, knowing that trust couldn't be rushed. Emma, meanwhile, had become a regular fixture in the Anderson household. Her bubbly personality and boundless energy were a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere that had long pervaded the mansion. She spent her afternoons exploring the garden, playing with the family's golden retriever Max, and occasionally sneaking into the music room to watch her mother work. One afternoon, as Sarah and Oliver were finishing a session, Emma burst into the room, her small keyboard tucked under her arm. "Mom, can I play something for Oliver?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Oliver. He was sitting on the floor, fiddling with a tambourine. "What do you think, Oliver?" she asked gently. "Would you like to hear Emma play?" Oliver didn't respond, but he didn't leave the room either. Taking that as a yes, Emma plopped down on the floor and set up her keyboard. She began to play a lively tune, her fingers dancing over the keys with surprising skill for a 6-year-old. As the music filled the room, Oliver's head tilted slightly, as if he were listening more closely. When Emma finished, she looked at Oliver expectantly. "Did you like it?" she asked, her voice bright and hopeful. Oliver didn't say anything, but he picked up the tambourine and gave it a single shake. The sound was soft, almost tentative, but it was enough to make Emma beam with pride. "Thanks, Oliver," she said, grinning from ear to ear. "Maybe next time we can play together." That evening, as Sarah was packing up her instruments, Michael appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, his arms crossed over his chest. "How's it going?" he asked, his tone cautious. Sarah straightened up, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "It's slow, but we're making progress," she said. "He's starting to engage, even if it's just a little." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Emma seems to be helping too," he said. "She's different. She brings a kind of energy this house hasn't had in a long time." Sarah smiled. "She has that effect on people." Michael hesitated, then said, "Do you really think this will work? That music can help him?" "I do," Sarah said firmly. "Music has a way of reaching people when nothing else can. It's not about fixing him, it's about giving him a way to express himself. to feel safe again. Michael looked at her for a long moment, his guarded exterior softening just a little. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trying." Sarah nodded, her resolve unwavering. "We'll get there, one step at a time." As the days turned into weeks, Oliver began to open up in small but significant ways. He started to spend more time in the music room, experimenting with the instruments Sarah brought. He even began to hum along to some of the songs Emma played, his voice soft and hesitant, but undeniably there. For Michael, it was like watching a flower slowly bloom after a long, harsh winter. He found himself spending more time at home, drawn to the warmth and light that Sarah and Emma had brought into his life. And though he didn't say it out loud, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: hope. It was a quiet afternoon in the Anderson mansion, the kind of stillness that had once felt suffocating but now carried a sense of anticipation. In the music room, Sarah sat at the piano, her fingers gliding over the keys as she played a soft, soothing melody. Oliver was sitting on the floor nearby, a small drum in his lap. He wasn't playing it, just holding it, his fingers tracing the edges absent-mindedly. Emma sat cross-legged beside him, her small keyboard balanced on her knees. "Let's try something together," Sarah said gently, her voice breaking the silence. She glanced at Oliver, her tone encouraging but never forceful. "I'll play the piano, and Emma can play her keyboard. You can join in with the drum whenever you feel ready." Oliver didn't respond, but he didn't leave the room either. That, in itself, was progress. Sarah began to play a simple, repetitive tune, the kind that invited participation. Emma joined in, her small hands moving confidently over the keys. The two melodies intertwined, creating a warm, inviting sound that filled the room. For a while, Oliver just sat there, his gaze fixed on the drum in his lap. Then, slowly, he raised one hand and tapped the drum with his fingers. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Sarah's heart swelled with hope, and she kept playing, her movements steady and deliberate. Emma noticed too, her face lighting up with excitement. "You're doing it, Oliver," she said, her voice bright and encouraging. "You're playing with us." Oliver glanced at her, his expression unreadable. But he didn't stop. He tapped the drum again, this time a little harder, the sound blending with the music. It was a small, tentative step, but to Sarah, it felt like a giant leap. Later that evening, as Sarah was packing up her instruments, Michael appeared in the doorway. He had been watching from a distance, his arms crossed over his chest. "I heard him," he said quietly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "He was playing." Sarah smiled, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "He's starting to engage," she said. "It's a process, but he's getting there." Michael stepped into the room, his gaze lingering on the drum Oliver had been playing. "I haven't seen him like this in years," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't think it was possible." "It's not just the music," Sarah said gently. "It's the connection. He's starting to trust again. That's the real breakthrough." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for not giving up on him." Sarah met his gaze, her own eyes soft with understanding. "I won't," she said simply. "He's worth it." The next day, Sarah decided to try something new. She brought a small, portable speaker to the music room and connected it to her phone. "Today, we're going to listen to some music," she told Oliver and Emma. "I want you to tell me what you think of it." Emma clapped her hands excitedly. "Can we listen to something fun?" she asked. Sarah smiled. "Of course. Let's start with this." She pressed play, and a lively, upbeat song filled the room. Emma immediately started swaying to the rhythm, her energy infectious. Oliver, as usual, remained still, but his head tilted slightly, as if he were listening more closely. When the song ended, Sarah turned to Oliver. "What did you think?" she asked gently. "Did you like it?" For a moment there was silence. Then, to everyone's surprise, Oliver nodded. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was the first time he had responded to a question in months. Emma gasped, her eyes wide with excitement. "He nodded, Mom. He liked it." Sarah's heart soared, but she kept her tone calm and steady. "That's great, Oliver," she said warmly. "I'm glad you liked it. Let's try another one." She played a slower, more emotional song this time, the kind that tugged at the heartstrings. As the music played, Sarah noticed a change in Oliver's posture. He seemed more relaxed, his body swaying ever so slightly to the rhythm. When the song ended, he reached out and touched the speaker, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface. "Do you want to hear it again?" Sarah asked softly. Oliver nodded again, this time more decisively. Emma clapped her hands, her excitement bubbling over. "He's starting to like music, Mom. He's really starting to like it." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "Music has a way of speaking to us," she said, "even when we don't have the words." That evening, as Sarah and Emma were leaving the mansion, Michael walked them to the door. "I don't know how you're doing it," he said, his voice filled with a mix of gratitude and wonder. "But he's changing. I can see it." "It's not just me," Sarah said, glancing at Emma, who was skipping ahead of them. "Emma's been a big part of this, too. She's showing him what it means to be a kid again." Michael nodded, his gaze softening as he watched Emma. "She's a special girl," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "You both are." Sarah felt a warmth rise in her chest, but she pushed it aside. This wasn't about her, it was about Oliver. "We still have a long way to go," she said, "but I think he's starting to find his way back." Michael looked at her, his expression serious. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, "for everything you're doing." "You don't have to," Sarah replied. "Just keep believing in him. That's all he needs." As she and Emma walked to their car, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. For the first time, it felt like Oliver was truly beginning to heal. And in the process, maybe Michael was too. The days turned into weeks, and the Anderson mansion began to feel less like a cold, empty shell and more like a home. The once oppressive silence was now filled with the sound of music, Emma's cheerful melodies, Sarah's soothing piano tunes, and, most importantly, the tentative rhythms that Oliver was beginning to create. Each session brought small but meaningful progress, and one afternoon, Sarah decided to try something different. She brought a blank notebook and a set of colorful markers to the music room. Oliver was sitting on the floor, as usual, fiddling with a small tambourine. Emma was nearby, playing a lively tune on her keyboard. "Oliver," Sarah said gently, sitting down beside him, "I thought we could try something new today. I want to know what's in your mind, what you're feeling. You don't have to say anything. You can draw it instead." She opened the notebook and placed it in front of him, along with the markers. "You can draw anything you want," she said. "It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to make sense, just whatever you feel." Oliver stared at the notebook for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he picked up a blue marker and began to draw. His movements were hesitant at first, but as the minutes passed, he became more focused. Sarah watched quietly, her heart swelling with hope. When he was finished, he pushed the notebook toward her without a word. Sarah picked it up and studied the drawing. It was simple but powerful, a small figure standing under a dark cloud with a single ray of sunlight breaking through. "It's beautiful, Oliver," Sarah said softly. "Thank you for sharing this with me." Oliver didn't respond, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked a lot like trust. That evening, as Sarah was leaving, Michael stopped her in the hallway. "He showed you something, didn't he?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah nodded, holding up the notebook. "He's starting to express himself," she said. "It's a big step." Michael stared at the drawing for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "That cloud," he said quietly. "It's been over him for so long. I just want him to feel the sunlight again." Sarah said firmly. "It's not easy, but he's getting there. And he's not alone." Michael looked at her, his expression softening. "Neither am I," he said, almost as an afterthought. Sarah felt a warmth rise in her chest, but she quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about her. It was about Oliver. The breakthrough came a week later, on a rainy afternoon. The sky outside was gray, and the sound of raindrops tapping against the windows filled the music room. Sarah had brought her guitar that day, and she was strumming a soft, melancholic tune. Oliver was sitting nearby, holding a small shaker. Emma was sprawled on the floor, doodling in her own notebook. As Sarah played, she began to hum a simple melody. It was a tune she had written herself, inspired by the progress Oliver had made. The words came naturally, flowing from her heart. When the clouds are heavy and the world feels cold, there's a light inside you brighter than gold. Step by step, we'll find our way through the dark to a brighter day. She sang softly, her voice filling the room like a warm embrace. Emma looked up from her drawing, her eyes wide with admiration. "That's so pretty, Mom," she said. Sarah smiled but didn't stop playing. She glanced at Oliver, who was staring at her intently. His hands were still, the shaker forgotten in his lap. For a moment, the room was completely silent, save for the sound of Sarah's voice and the rain outside. Then it happened. A soft, barely audible sound escaped Oliver's lips. It was just one word, but it was enough to make Sarah's heart stop. "Again," he whispered. Sarah froze, her fingers hovering over the strings. She wasn't sure if she had imagined it. "What did you say, Oliver?" she asked gently, her voice trembling. Oliver looked at her, his dark eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time. "Hope." "Again," he said, a little louder this time. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She nodded, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Of course," she said. "I'll play it again." She started the song over, her fingers moving more confidently now. This time, as she sang, Oliver began to hum along. His voice was soft and shaky, but it was there. Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Mom, he's singing!" she exclaimed. Sarah's heart felt like it might burst. She kept playing, her voice steady and strong, guiding Oliver like a lighthouse in the storm. By the time the song ended, Oliver was humming the melody on his own, his voice growing stronger with each note. When the last chord faded, the room was silent for a moment. Then Emma threw her arms around Oliver, her excitement bubbling over. "You did it, Oliver. You sang. I'm so proud of you." Oliver didn't pull away. Instead, he looked at Sarah, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. Sarah smiled, her own eyes brimming with tears. "You did it, Oliver," she said. "You found your voice." That evening, as Sarah and Emma were leaving, Michael met them at the door. He looked at Sarah, his expression a mix of disbelief and overwhelming emotion. "He spoke," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He actually spoke." Sarah nodded, her smile radiant. "He's finding his way back," she said. "It's just the beginning, but it's a big step." Michael ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "You've given me my son back." "You don't have to thank me," Sarah said gently. "This is all Oliver. He's stronger than he knows." Michael looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You've done more for us than I ever thought possible," he said. "You've brought light back into this house." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat, but she pushed it down. "It's not just me," she said, glancing at Emma, who was skipping ahead to the car. "Emma's been a big part of this too. She's shown Oliver what it means to be a kid again." Michael nodded, his gaze softening. "She's a special girl," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "And so are you." As Sarah and Emma drove away, the rain began to let up, and a faint ray of sunlight broke through the clouds. For the first time in years, the Anderson mansion felt like a place of hope, a place where healing was possible. The days following Oliver's first words were nothing short of transformative. The Anderson mansion, once cloaked in silence and sorrow, now buzzed with life. Oliver's progress was slow but steady, and each small victory felt monumental. He began to hum more often during Sarah's sessions, sometimes even singing softly when he thought no one was listening. His once blank expressions were now peppered with fleeting smiles, and the dark cloud that had hung over him seemed to be lifting. Michael, too, was changing. He spent more time at home, often lingering in the music room to watch Sarah and Emma work with Oliver. His once guarded demeanor softened, and he began to open up, sharing stories about Oliver's childhood and the happy times they had shared before tragedy struck. It was clear that Michael was healing alongside his son, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing she had played a part in their journey. One afternoon, Sarah decided it was time to take the next step. She had been working with Oliver for weeks, and while his progress was remarkable, she knew that true healing would require him to step out of his comfort zone. "Oliver," she said gently, sitting beside him on the floor, "I have an idea. How would you feel about playing music for someone else? Just a small audience, me, Emma, and your dad." Oliver's eyes widened, and he immediately shook his head, his body tensing. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to decide right now, but I think it could be a good way to show how far you've come, and we'll all be there to support you." Oliver didn't respond, but he didn't leave the room either. Sarah took that as a sign that he was at least considering it. That evening, Sarah brought the idea up to Michael. They were sitting in the living room, the warm glow of the fireplace casting soft shadows on the walls. Emma was curled up on the couch, fast asleep after a long day of playing with Max in the garden. "I think Oliver is ready to share his music," Sarah said, her voice thoughtful. "It doesn't have to be anything big, just the four of us, but I think it could be a powerful moment for him." Michael frowned, his brow furrowing in concern. "Are you sure he's ready?" he asked. "I don't want to push him too hard." "I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think he could handle it," Sarah replied. "But it has to be his choice. If he says no, we won't push him." Michael nodded slowly, his expression softening. "All right," he said. "If you think it's the right thing to do, I trust you." The next day, Sarah brought it up again during her session with Oliver. This time, she framed it as an invitation rather than a challenge. "You've been working so hard, Oliver," she said, her tone warm and encouraging. "I think it would be wonderful to share your music with the people who care about you. But it's completely up to you. If you're not ready, that's okay." Oliver was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he nodded. It was a small, hesitant nod, but it was enough to make her heart leap. "That's amazing, Oliver," she said, her voice filled with genuine pride. "We'll keep it simple, and I'll be right there with you the whole time." The day of the performance arrived, and the Anderson mansion was filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. Sarah had set up the music room with a few chairs and a small table of snacks, creating a cozy, welcoming atmosphere. Emma was buzzing with excitement, her small keyboard set up beside the piano. Michael, though visibly nervous, did his best to stay calm, not wanting to project his anxiety onto Oliver. When Oliver entered the room, he looked around nervously, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. Sarah knelt down beside him, her voice soft and reassuring. "You're going to do great," she said. "Just remember, this is for you. It's not about being perfect, it's about sharing a piece of yourself." Oliver nodded, his expression serious but determined. He sat down at the small drum set Sarah had brought for him, his hands resting lightly on the drumsticks. Emma gave him an encouraging smile from her spot at the keyboard, and Michael sat quietly in the corner, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and emotion. Sarah began to play the piano, starting with the same simple melody she had sung to Oliver weeks ago. Emma joined in, her keyboard adding a bright, cheerful layer to the music. After a few moments, Oliver lifted his drumsticks and began to play. His rhythm was steady and confident, and as the music filled the room, the tension in his shoulders seemed to melt away. When the song ended, the room was silent for a moment. Then Michael stood up, clapping slowly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That was incredible, Oliver," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so proud of you." Emma ran over to Oliver, throwing her arms around him. "You were amazing," she exclaimed, her face glowing with excitement. Oliver didn't say anything, but he smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up his entire face. Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat as she watched the scene unfold. This was why she did what she did. Moments like this made all the hard work, all the late nights, and all the emotional exhaustion worth it. That evening, as Sarah and Emma were getting ready to leave, Michael stopped them at the door. "I don't know how to put this into words," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "You've given me my son back. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that." "You don't have to thank me," Sarah said, her voice equally soft. "This was all Oliver. He's stronger than any of us realized." Michael nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment. "You've done more for this family than I ever thought possible," he said. "You've brought light back into our lives." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "It's been an honor to be a part of this journey," she said. "But this is just the beginning. Oliver has so much more to give, and I know he's going to do amazing things." As she and Emma drove away, the mansion behind them glowing softly in the evening light, Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. Oliver's journey was far from over, but he was on the right path, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. The weeks that followed Oliver's first performance were nothing short of transformative. The boy who had once hidden in the shadows of his own silence was now stepping into the light, little by little. His confidence grew with each passing day, and the music room became his sanctuary, a place where he could express himself without fear or judgment. Sarah continued her sessions with Oliver, but they began to feel less like therapy and more like collaboration. Oliver started to take the lead, experimenting with different instruments and even composing his own simple melodies. Emma, ever the enthusiastic cheerleader, was always by his side, encouraging him with her boundless energy and infectious laughter. One afternoon, as Sarah was packing up her things, Oliver approached her with a notebook in hand. He held it out to her, his expression shy but determined. "I wrote something," he said softly. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time Oliver had initiated something like this. She took the notebook and opened it, her eyes scanning the page. It was a song, simple but heartfelt, with lyrics that spoke of hope and healing. "This is beautiful, Oliver," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "Would you like to play it for your dad and Emma?" Oliver hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Maybe," he said after a moment, "but I want to practice first." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'll be here to help you." That evening, Sarah shared the news with Michael. They were sitting in the kitchen, a rare moment of quiet after a long day. Emma was upstairs playing with Max, and Oliver was in the music room, practicing his new song. "He wrote a song," Sarah said, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's beautiful, Michael. He's really starting to find his voice." Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of disbelief and pride. "I never thought I'd see the day," he said quietly. "You've done something incredible, Sarah. You've given him a way to heal." "It's not just me," Sarah said, shaking her head. "Oliver is doing the hard work, and Emma has been such a big part of this too. She's shown him what it means to be a kid again." Michael nodded, his gaze softening. "She's a special girl," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "And so are you." Sarah felt a warmth rise in her chest, but she quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about her. It was about Oliver and the progress he was making. A week later, Oliver was ready. He had practiced his song every day, and though he was still nervous, he was determined to share it with the people who mattered most to him. Sarah, Emma, and Michael gathered in the music room, their expressions filled with anticipation. Oliver sat at the piano, his small frame dwarfed by the grand instrument. He took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the keys. Then, slowly, he began to play. The melody was soft and haunting, each note resonating with emotion. When he began to sing, his voice was quiet but steady, the lyrics carrying a message of hope and resilience. Through the darkness, I found my way, a little light to guide my day. Step by step, I'll learn to stand, with love beside me, hand in hand. As the final note faded, the room was silent for a moment. Then Emma jumped up, clapping her hands and cheering. "That was amazing, Oliver!" she exclaimed, her face glowing with pride. Michael stood, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He walked over to Oliver and pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've come so far." Oliver smiled, his face lighting up in a way Sarah had never seen before. "Thank you," he said softly, "for believing in me." That evening, as Sarah and Emma were getting ready to leave, Michael stopped them at the door. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "You've given me my son back. You've given us all a second chance." "You don't have to thank me," Sarah said, her voice equally soft. "This was all Oliver. He's stronger than any of us realized." Michael nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment. "You've done more for this family than I ever thought possible," he said. "You've brought light back into our lives." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "It's been an honor to be a part of this journey," she said, "but this is just the beginning. Oliver has so much more to give, and I know he's going to do amazing things." In the weeks that followed, Oliver continued to thrive. He began to attend school again, his confidence growing with each passing day. He even joined the school's music club, where he found a group of friends who shared his love of music. For the first time in years, he was truly happy. Michael, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. He started spending more time with Oliver, rebuilding the bond that had been strained by years of grief. And though the pain of their loss would never fully disappear, they had found a way to move forward together. As for Sarah, she knew her work with the Anderson family was coming to an end, but she also knew that the impact they had made on each other's lives would last forever. On her final day at the mansion, Michael walked her to the door, his expression filled with gratitude. "You've changed our lives, Sarah," he said. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," Sarah said, her voice warm. "Seeing Oliver smile again is all the thanks I need." Michael hesitated, then said, "You'll always have a place here. If you ever need anything at all, you know where to find us." Sarah nodded, her heart heavy but full. "Thank you, Michael," she said. "Take care of each other." As she and Emma drove away, the mansion behind them bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. Oliver's journey was far from over, but he was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright not just for Oliver, but for all of them. Thank you so much for watching this story on Emma's Stories. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more heartwarming tales like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. See you in the next story.